The music followed us out into the street when the door closed behind us, the band still going somewhere further down the hill. Hearthwick showed no sign of ending the night, and lights burned in every window along the road between the manor and the lower shops. The town took full advantage of the commandant's generosity. After months of curfews and rationing, no one was eager to surrender the evening. Soldiers lingered in small groups along the pavement, jackets open, cigarettes glowing in the dark, while locals drifted easily between them. Discipline loosened for the celebration, though I suspected it would be restored with enthusiasm once morning returned the garrison to its senses. Ordinarily, I would have taken issue with it, but that night I didn't bother. The guards assigned to Grace remained several paces behind us, their attention fixed on the street rather than the festivities unfolding around them. As long as that arrangement held, the rest of the town could do as it pleased. Whatever liberties Hearthwick indulged in for one evening would be of no consequence to me once the aircraft lifted off the runway. By that time the following day, we'd all be tucked in our beds back home, swimming in crisp, clean sheets, and being waited upon by people who knew how to do so properly. Grace hugged my arm, less from affection than necessity. The champagne and whiskey she nipped from me won their campaign against her balance. So, by the time we reached the lower street, she was leaning against me so that the slightest adjustment of my posture would have put her directly onto the pavement. The two men posted outside her shop came to attention as we approached, one pulling the door open, while the pair who had accompanied us from the hall stepped forward to meet them. A brief conversation passed between them as they traded reports and smoked, leaving me alone to deal with Grace. I closed the door behind us, and Grace turned back to me, catching the front of my coat before I took more than a step into the room. "I was just thinking I have no luggage," she said, while she attempted to guide us both towards the stairs. There was something different in the way she spoke to me then, quieter, closer, her fingers tangling in my buttons as she guided me backwards, as if she were gentle enough about it. I might not notice I was being led away. "How will I get home all those lovely things you got for me?" I understood she thought the evening ought to continue in a more private setting, and honestly, her flushed cheeks and wine-stained lips made it nearly impossible to disagree. "Carry what you cannot live without, and leave the rest behind." I let her guide me back a pace or two before I stopped myself, if only because I knew that if I didn't stop myself soon, I might not stop at all. So I removed her hands from me before she could pull me another step, lifting them to my mouth. "It would be my pleasure to replace it all." I kept one of her hands as I shifted my hold, my other hand settling at her back to steer her away from the stairs and towards the table near the front window. Of course, she pouted at me as though I were being deliberately cruel, when in truth I was being kinder than she realized. Still, I cannot pretend I didn't have a certain satisfaction in discovering how much my refusal frustrated her. "I do not wish for you to leave me," she said, turning and pressing herself against me. "We can sit here and talk all night if it pleases you." I was not blind to what she was offering me, nor was I immune to it. A lesser man might have accepted the invitation to her bed and counted himself fortunate for it. But I had no intention of being the lesser man, and she'd never been a woman meant for lesser things. "Enough, Grace," I said as I pulled her hands free of me again. "You of all people should know I will not." But for a moment, I considered it for any man would be a fool not to. But I didn't spend all that time restoring what was taken from her to undo it in a single evening of too much alcohol and poor judgment. I stepped around her before she could discover a more effective method of persuasion, my hand moving to her waist as I turned her from me and guided her towards the window. "Do you see the open window at the Commandant's manor, the one on the top floor at the end of the hall?" Grace followed the motion of my hand as I pointed it out, though she made a quiet show of sighing as she did so to make it clear she recognized a tactical diversion when she heard one. "I do." I brought my other arm around her and rested my head against hers, drawing her close so we could look at it together. "Since I came here, I have sat at that window every night, until your light goes out, and sometimes until it comes on again in the morning. I keep watch over you." She went quiet and still. as though it hadn't been what she expected to hear. "And after tonight, I will never be more than a few doors away from you again." She turned her head to look at me then, not with the annoyance or mischief she had a moment before, but with an expression suggesting she were only just beginning to understand that I was entirely serious. I laid my hand on her cheek, suspecting this was the part where I should say something charming, or at the very least, kiss her. Unfortunately for both of us, I always found it simpler to tell the truth. "You cannot believe I am refusing because I do not want you," I brushed my thumb along her face. "But I have not waited this long for you, only to make us a scandal now." The guards who'd been there all evening started up the hill for the manor, while the ones who accompanied us back from the party made for the door to take their posts inside. I'd been away from her for all those years with little difficulty. However, leaving her now, even for what remained of the night, was possibly the most difficult thing I'd ever done. "I shall return for you at first light," I told her and kissed her forehead as I released her. "Get some rest if you can. It will be a long day tomorrow." The door opened behind me, reminding me rather abruptly that this was neither the time nor the place for the sort of farewell I might have preferred. "Pleasant dreams, my darling." I had almost made my escape when she spoke, and I stopped with my hand on the door, because some things a man simply cannot pretend he hasn't heard. "I love you, Christy," she said. "As far back as I remember anything, I remember loving you." I turned back to her fully then and opened my mouth to answer. It seemed to me that something ought to be said in return, if only because a declaration like that deserved more than silence, and because I found that I very much wanted to hear her say it again. I'd never been skilled at finding the right words for moments that required them this way, and anything that occurred to me sounded either insufficient or unnecessarily dramatic, neither of which was appropriate for people like us. She didn't give me long to struggle with it, though. She drew herself up instead, clasping her hands behind her back, her chin lifting, and a faint arch to one eyebrow, certain of its own authority. I'd seen that exact look delivered across schoolroom tables, and once, memorably, from the back of a pony she asked me to fetch for her. And it always meant the same thing. She'd said what she intended to say, and whatever happened next would proceed according to her wishes rather than mine. "And now," she said, "you may go, Mr. Ashcombe." Something was amusing in being dismissed from her shop as though I were a servant who'd outstayed his welcome. But the truth was that Grace had been dismissing and summoning me at her leisure for her own entertainment since we were children, and I had never once seriously objected to her doing so. My Grace was used to having the last word, and I'd always been quite keen to see she had it, so I only lowered my head to her instead of giving the terribly bumbled speech she'd intentionally prevented me from making. It seemed to satisfy her, which was, as ever, the only thing that ever mattered to me. Then I turned and let myself out before I was tempted to go back on any of my better decisions.